The carriage rattled along the winding lane. Rain lashed against the windows. I pulled my thin shawl tighter around my shoulders. The year was 1888. I was to be the new governess at Blackwood Manor. The letter had been brief. It offered a generous salary. It mentioned 2 young children, Flora and Miles. It said nothing of the isolation, nothing of the brooding silence that clung to the very air as we approached. The house rose from the mist like a jagged tooth. It was a dark, sprawling building of grey stone. Ivy crept up its walls like skeletal fingers. I felt a cold dread settle deep within my bones. It was a feeling I could not shake. The driver did not speak as he unloaded my single trunk. He simply pointed towards the heavy oak door and left. I was alone on the doorstep. The air was unnaturally still. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of water from the eaves. I lifted the heavy iron knocker. It was shaped like a raven's head. The sound echoed through the house, a hollow, lonely boom. After a long moment, the door creaked open. A sliver of light cut through the gloom. An elderly housekeeper, Mrs. Groves, stood there. Her face was pale and drawn. She did not smile. She simply nodded and led me inside. The great hall was vast and cold. A single candle flickered on a small table, casting long, dancing shadows. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides. My footsteps echoed on the flagstone floor. A grand staircase swept upwards into blackness. Portraits lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow me. Mrs. Gross led me through a labyrinth of corridors. Each one was colder than the last. The silence was profound. It was a heavy, watchful silence. It felt as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I tried to ask about the children, but my voice felt small and weak in the cavernous space. My room was at the end of a long, narrow hallway. It was a large room, dominated by a 4-poster bed draped in heavy, dark curtains. A small fire crackled weakly in the hearth. It did little to chase away the chill. Mrs. Groves placed the candle on the mantelpiece. "The children are asleep," she said, her voice a low murmur. "They are not to be disturbed." She looked at me then, a strange, searching look in her eyes. "This house has its ways," she whispered, before turning and leaving me alone. The door clicked shut behind her, plunging the room into near-total darkness, save for the dying fire and the single trembling flame of the candle. That first night, sleep would not come. I lay in the enormous bed, staring up into the darkness above. The wind howled outside, a mournful, wailing sound. It rattled the window panes. It sounded like a voice crying out in the wilderness. The house itself seemed to groan and settle around me. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the ivy against the glass sent a shiver down my spine. I told myself it was just an old house. Old houses make noises. But the sounds felt different here. They felt deliberate. They felt watchful. I pulled the covers up to my chin, my heart thudding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Then I heard it, a whisper. It was faint at first, like the sighing of the wind, but it was inside the room. It seemed to come from the corner, near the tall, dark wardrobe. I held my breath, straining to listen. There it was again, closer this time. A soft, sibilant sound, like a secret being shared. I could not make out the words. It was just a breath, a murmur in the oppressive silence. I lit my candle, my hand trembling so much the flame danced wildly. The room was empty. There was nothing in the corner. Nothing but shadows, stretching and shrinking in the flickering light. I told myself it was my imagination. I was tired. I was nervous. The nights that followed were all the same. The cold seemed to seep into the very marrow of my bones, a damp, unnatural chill that the fire could not touch. I would wake suddenly in the dead of night. The room would be freezing. I would hear the whispers, always just beyond the edge of hearing. Sometimes it sounded like a woman humming a lullaby, a sad, tuneless melody that made my blood run cold. I would see movement in the periphery of my vision, a shadow detaching itself from the others, gliding along the wall before melting back into the darkness. I started leaving the candle burning all night. I did not speak of this to Mrs. Gross. How could I? She would think me mad. During the day, the house was merely gloomy. The children, Flora and Miles, were quiet and pale. They played their games in silence. They watched me with wide, unblinking eyes. But when night fell, the manor transformed. It became a place of unseen things, a place of creeping dread. The whispers grew more insistent. The shadows grew bolder. I felt a constant presence, a feeling of being watched by someone who was not there. The fear was a living thing inside me, growing with each passing night. One evening, I was preparing for bed. The air was particularly cold. The silence in the house was absolute. It was a suffocating silence, the kind that presses on your eardrums. I stood before the large ornate mirror above the dressing table. The silvering was old and tarnished, creating dark, cloudy spots across the glass. I was brushing my hair, the rhythmic strokes a small comfort in the stillness. My own reflection looked back at me, pale, frightened. The candlelight flickered, making the image waver. I tried to focus on the simple, repetitive task, to block out the creeping fear that was my constant companion in this house. I paused, brush in midair. Something was wrong. In the reflection, behind my own shoulder, a shape was forming. It was a smudge at first, a trick of the old glass and the low light. I stared, my heart beginning to hammer in my chest. I did not dare to turn around. I kept my eyes fixed on the mirror. The shape slowly resolved itself. It was a face, a woman's face. It was gaunt and pale, with hollow eyes that were black pits of sorrow and despair. Her mouth was a thin, tight line. She was not looking at me. She was looking past me, into the room, with an expression of terrible, unending grief. My breath caught in my throat. I could not move. I could not scream. The figure in the glass was so clear, so real. I could see the dark, lank hair plastered to her forehead. I could see the high collar of her old-fashioned dress. A cold draft swirled around me, extinguishing the candle on the dressing table. The room was plunged into darkness. For a terrifying moment, I was blind, knowing that she was there, just behind me. I could feel her presence. I could feel the coldness that radiated from her. The air was thick with it, thick with her sorrow. With a choked sob, I scrambled away from the mirror. I fumbled for the matches on the mantelpiece, my fingers clumsy with terror. I struck one, then another. The flame flared to life, casting a weak, trembling glow around the room. I spun around, holding the match aloft like a weapon. The room was empty. There was no one there. I was alone. I rushed to the mirror, but my own terrified face was the only one that looked back. The glass was empty, but the image of the pale, grieving woman was burned into my mind. I knew then. I knew I was not imagining it. I was. The fear was constant now. It lived with me, breathed with me. I saw the woman everywhere. A fleeting glimpse of a dark dress at the end of a long corridor. A pale face peering from an upstairs window as I walked in the gardens. At night, the tapping began. A soft, insistent tap, tap, tapping on my bedroom window, even though my room was on the second floor. I would lie frozen in my bed, listening to the sound, imagining her floating outside in the darkness, her long fingers rapping against the glass, wanting to be let in. The whispers were words now. "He is mine," they would hiss from the shadows. "Leave this place." I became a ghost in my own right, flitting through the halls, starting at every sound. Mrs. Groves watched me with pity in her eyes, but she said nothing. The children grew more distant, their silent games full of a secret knowledge I could not comprehend. I felt myself becoming undone. Was this house driving me mad? Or was it haunted by a spirit so full of rage and sorrow that it was bleeding into my own mind? The line between what was real and what was imagined had begun to blur. The manor was a prison, and I was its captive, haunted by a spectre or by my own fracturing sanity. One night, the storm returned, worse than the night I arrived. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the very foundations of the manor. The rain beat against the house in a furious torrent. My candle went out, and I could not find my matches in the dark. I sat on the edge of my bed, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the fury of the storm and the creaking of the house. The tapping on the window was frantic now, competing with the thunder. The whispers were a shriek on the wind. "Mine!" it screamed. "Mine!" I buried my face in my hands, praying for morning. Then, through the cacophony, I felt it, a sudden, deathly cold spot right behind me. The air grew heavy and still. The sounds of the storm faded into a dull roar. I felt a weight, a pressure on my left shoulder. It was a hand. It was impossibly cold, the chill seeping through my dress and my shawl, touching my very skin. It was a small, delicate hand, but its grip was firm, possessive. I did not dare to breathe. I did not dare to turn. Was this the culmination of my terror, a final chilling touch from the world beyond? Or was it the final collapse of my mind, my own imagination conjuring the very thing I feared most?